tunnels, for example, in an old city, for example in Amsterdam, we don't have fences around the canals. And every week people, wat zeg je, te verdrinken? Drown, yeah, every weekend, yeah. So, foreigners mostly. But we learn our kids swimming. Already when my kids are now at the age of 6, and they all get swimming. So they already start learning swimming very easy. So we also like to deal with this kind of rules that are that grab our built environment and to question them, especially the ones which dictate public space. Yeah, something completely different, but again, there it's also about looking to heritage in a different way. This used to be a former factory with lots of ovens inside. But you so there are many different ways to look to this heritage. I think in Rusland, as I hear you talking about it, it's much more complicated to deal with governmental buildings, I think, or not? For you? To come up with new proposals.
Actually, what I'm thinking about is, answering your question, comparison between Russia and I would say Europe, maybe Western Europe. I think it's very. The difference would be that because of our cultural history and present situation, we cannot stomach any kind of sacrilege, any desecration. Although, I mean, logically, and I think what you're saying, and I had a discussion with a student just an hour ago about that sometimes the only way to reveal real meaning of a monument is to desacralize it, to sacrilege, because that's when people start to say why they value this thing. That's when you get a reaction. So I think that's more or less kind of thing that's what you do. But the level of, but I think what's different is the level culturally, not just governmental, but across culture, the level of tolerance towards that kind of critical and hardcore action. Putting a building fire to show that it has a value. That's kind of thing that we're not ready for yet. Maybe. What do you think?
I don't know. I think everything is possible in Russia, and actually in.
That's what we like to hear.
And actually, how we say about it in Russia that Russia has a really understandable future, but really unpredictable past. And which somehow shows the way we deal with the past, because the past for us and the history for us is a tool for manipulation, tool for understanding who we are, and tool which we use in a very different way according to the way we need to feel right now, like this. And what actually I'd like to just to proceed with this comparison between Dutch, Russian, and this attitude to the heritage is that I've been to Rotterdam several times, and actually when I was going through the city, after I think several days I've been there, I realized what's in the pavement, what really strikes me in the pavement. You know, this light points where bombs were.
You mean the border of the.
Which is really kind of which really different from the way we perceive war and the tragedy of war in Moscow, for example, or in Russia in general. And actually, what I'd like to compare it with with an attitude to the same issues in Berlin, for example, which is really obsessed with the memory, which you are surrounded with this annoying remembrance of something which you don't like to remember. What if you can summarize a Dutch attitude to the memory and a Dutch attitude for the heritage, shorter, how would you explain what is this attitude?
Now you make it really general, so yeah, I can just speak for myself because. Yeah.
So it's not perhaps the Dutch attitude if you would go ask people on the street, but we have a very strong cultural heritage agency, and their policy is to preserve diversity. So to have characteristic buildings of different times, even though perhaps nobody may like them, they will be preserved. And then there's also things that are not yet ready to be preserved, like the Cold War airbase that we were showing, that Ronald was presenting. We find it important cultural heritage, but they find it too big and too difficult to preserve. So then people start lobbying, and then it will be influenced by that kind of movement.
What about colonial history?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about that at the moment, colonial history. I just wanted to start about it. There is at the moment very much discussion about this. So as well as in Belgium, as well as in the Netherlands, it's now really in the point of the debate. So what are we going to do with stuff that is stolen actually from other cultures, etc., etc. So we can talk about this in a whole evening, or maybe 10 evenings, or maybe 10 years. There is now an enormous discussion about, but that's actually cultural history that isn't constructed, but is there. Yeah, of course, there's many discussion about, and the way, it's just the start of the debate at the moment. Yeah, yeah, that's
So
what it is.
What would your solution be?
Solution, there is no solution for this. There's no. I think that because it's very complicated and multi-layered. I think so. It would be idiot to say I have a solution for this. It's a complicated discussion at the moment in the Netherlands. Yeah, and I don't have. We never think actually in solutions because whether to come up with thinking models, but it interests us definitely, of course, because you see that colonial history has lots of influences on the way we behave daily in public space. We do have lots of black people from Suriname and other colonies, and there is still a kind of a part of history that hasn't been implemented in a good way, and also it's difficult for people to be open about history, especially the dark parts in our history. It's of course in many cultures, but also in the Netherlands it's really present. And I think there is a lot to you could say to win in this discussion and to think about this. It starts at the moment, the last couple of years, and I think it's really important also to get newcomers.
I still think that cutting would be a beautiful solution.
Maybe cutting through other things, huh?
Because the same situation that we saw, I guess, a couple of years now, that happened in the south of the United States, where they turning down monuments to southern generals, if they would agree to leave them on their place but cut something, that would be maybe a much better solution.
Of course, it's good to continue in this case, because I'd like to talk about things where you have been studying on. So, for example, I was just talking about these flak terms in Vienna. That's really a difficult thing in the middle of a city, in the middle of a culture, and it's about not only about Vienna, but especially about Germany. And that's where we come up with another kind of solution on built heritage with our approach of hardcore heritage. You will see it later on.
But what is important is that we also here don't put out general rules. We always look very site-specifically.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a building, almost a fortress, a huge fortress built by Hitler in the center of Vienna. What is the history? What lives? What's the life around it? How do people experience it from certain perspectives in the city? And then we come with a tailor-made proposal to deal with it. So we would not we look at it case by case and go into the history and think what it could mean in the future.
Мы хотели напомнить, что в любой момент, когда наши уважаемые слушатели захотели бы подключиться к беседе, мы будем открыты к этому, как и в вопросах памяти и наследия. Поэтому, если есть какие-то вопросы, да, просто каким-нибудь образом дайте нам знак. У нас 2 микрофона, одним мы с удовольствием поделимся.
Started with landscape, with working with landscape, and then you turned to heritage. How this transformation, this shift had done, and how you go to the idea of the affordances. Was it linked with the working with heritage, with landscape? Sorry.
Was it linked to working with
landscape?
So Ronald was originally trained as a landscape architect, and I was originally trained as a philosopher, and we were basically finding our freedom by working on art projects. So that's how we moved towards making more and more works that from the work of making art installations can comment on practices in architecture. So we like the freedom that we get by doing more the art commissions and getting our funding from that field, because as Ronald always likes to say, in architecture, at least in the Netherlands, people often behave as slaves of the market. It's very commercial, the way architecture is organized, and often people do not get enough freedom to do non-commercial and time to do non-commercial research.
Yeah, they don't take enough time. Yeah.
I think that the traces of your landscape training is also very visible, because...
And where is your LSAT of the moment?
Yeah. No, I was saying that the traces of landscape training that you had, because I think that, again, speaking architecturally, I think that landscape architects are usually much more delicate in their solutions, while sort of other architects are usually trying to imagine an object and build an object, while landscape architects are usually looking for a very specific place where the interaction between something new and something existing should occur.
No, as you can see, it's mostly about the work about built constructions in the end. But what is really good about when I started, it was good to start with landscape architecture before doing things on architecture and art. Why? Because it's about time and process. And you start thinking on a different kind of time scale. It's really important to come up with visions on the long term. Like VKTNL couldn't, I think an architect wouldn't come up with such a way of thinking. Also in process, so that you know how things go over time, and you relate yourself to kind of context and history, because there is always something that has been made before you. So how you respond to that and take a new direction. So, but it's really being really sensitive to the location, and also inside. So even in interior. Tomorrow you will see a project, for example, the end of sitting. Eric will talk about it. It's a completely different side of the studio, not about heritage at all, but where you see a really sensitive approach, where you see actually the idea of landscape architecture returning in a completely different way. But I think it's the way we deal with spaces. We are trying to make total environments, you could say, or total installations. So it's kind of a total experience. That's important. So we are really sensitive how things are. We are not looking for a kind of design object somewhere in the middle of nowhere and that's it. It's always about dealing with context and what it sets in motion in the way of thinking, but also spatially, and how you experience.
Yeah, and actually, just to go a bit further from your answer, actually the topic we gathered together to discuss actually is intangible heritage, as far as I remember. What is your perspective on this tangible and intangible thing? Because as we discussed today, it's actually for you at least it's really complicated to differ from one each other, because one proceeds another. And you answer just another question. How would you approach working with intangible heritage in this case? Is it possible to make a hardcore preservation of intangible heritage?
Quite sure it is, but so I would like to. I think in our case, the distinction between tangible and intangible isn't so strict. Just like the distinction between, say, material objects here and social norms. Social norms we do not see, but there is a social norm that you as a public are not going to sit here, and that's not visible, but still by being familiar with how this kind of situation works, you immediately know that when you come to listen to a talk, you will be sitting there. So also in that kind of very basic ways of engaging with a chair already there is an intangible or immaterial aspect that we all know how to deal with. And for that it's important to think in terms of skills again, because it's on the basis of your skills of dealing with chairs and visiting talks or academic events or art events, that thanks to these skills and the history in which you've acquired these skills, you know how to navigate both the material aspects and the intangible aspects. So I would propose to make a shift from the distinction between tangible and intangible to trying to perhaps take a skill-based perspective on heritage, where it always comes together.
Yeah, going back to social norms, let's ask the audience to to use these chairs.
Well, I will have one more question. When you spoke about the colonial heritage, actually, I think we speak about things that are called typical heritage, which is hurting, and this returns us to the point when we spoke. Can the crucial questions make hurt to you? Critical questions, and. And you speak about embodiment of the memory. If you work with this difficult heritage, what will be your orientation to change the memories, to change the attitude of this heritage, or to revelate the history or something else?
Yeah, so when in working with troubled or burdened heritage, I think you need to be sensitive to different sociocultural practices. So there's different sociocultural groups and patterns of behavior over time that have been evolved, and people being part of different sociocultural groups will have different experiences. And you need to be sensitive to the different practices and the different sensibilities there. But sometimes I think art actually helps often, because art doesn't need to speak in words. Art can just make an artwork, and that can sometimes just serve in between the different fields and speak to different people and allow people from different backgrounds to project their own ideas on it. Yeah. So it's often by not saying too much and by being silent and by offering something, let's call it an artwork, that people are able to project their own ideas on it, and rather than that you prescribe one way of thinking.
Also, art is safe.
Does it have to be safe? No.
This doesn't
It's safer than words.
No.
It's safer than words. It's a legit space of being critical.
Yeah, words are maybe
being punched.
It's safer than words.
Yeah, but words maybe it's up to politics to come up with the right thing. I think it would be good with this colonial stuff to be honest about the whole history. So tell the full story. So stories. So multiple stories next to each other. That would help a lot. And that's the start. So I said the discussion just started, but even this is not going on at the moment. So that's the first thing we should do, I think. Yeah. And art is absolutely not safe. It doesn't have to be safe. So, but we are not going to talk about that too much. But of course, it doesn't have to be safe. But this is it's really sensitive. That's a bit my concern. And if you want to say something about it, it's good to do good research on it and to come up with a different point of view. It's instead of just shouting.
What I wanted to add to a question that Renata just asked, or it could be a different sort of angle to this question. When you're dealing with this kind of burdened heritage, problematic heritage, do you feel that you have to evaluate this history by yourselves before you start, or in the process of working, to make your own decisions? Or you rather think that you have to understand others' people, attitudes, and not take a position of your own, reflect or react or help them to discuss these things without taking your own decisions, without deciding for yourselves?
Again, site-specific work.
Yeah, but in different cases, I know that it's site-specific, but for example in Vienna, what you're doing in Vienna, coming from a place that is sort of, could be felt offended by both of these countries.
Of course, if you talk about art, I think we made this for the Royal Society of Arts, this project. We are members of the Royal Society of Arts, and everybody can do his own project. And we thought this would be really a challenge to do something with this burdened heritage, and to come up. And I think this is sharp. You were talking about this is art, which is also sharp. I think for the let's say for the right-wing culture in Austria, it will definitely be sharp. And I think for others, it will open up a new perspective. So.